Dolphins fans, how are we doing today? It is Ben Morgan of the Fins Up Network here to dive into our Week 3 matchup against the Seattle Seahawks. We got a lot to dive into today. We're going to take a quick look into the initial injury report. We're going to break down the Miami Dolphins and the Seattle Seahawks, take a look at what we may be in store for on Sunday afternoon. We're going to dive into all of that in just a second. But before we do, I got to hear from you. I'd like to hear any questions that you would like addressed in this week's final preview and prediction video between the Dolphins and Seahawks. Go ahead, get your questions submitted. As always, we will get to as many of those questions as possible. So anything you've got, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Like we said, we won't spend too much time on this initial injury report, but just a couple of quick things to note. Calais Campbell's DNP is a veteran rest day, but outside of that, Teron Armstead was a DNP with his shoulder injury, and Robert Jones was limited with his shoulder injury. And it was Kendall Lamb that we saw coming in for Teron Armstead, and it was Lester Cotton that came in for Robert Jones last week against the Bills when those injuries happened. Now, I'm assuming that things would likely stay the same in regards to the Lester Cotton, Robert Jones situation, but I would be curious to see if it's Patrick Paul or Kendall Lamb that would fill in at left tackle in the event Teron Armstead cannot go. Because if you look at the team's latest depth chart, Patrick Paul is actually listed as Teron Armstead's backup. But obviously it was Kendall Lamb that we saw getting the action on Thursday against the Bills following his injury. Mike McDaniel was asked about that, and he basically said, you know what, with Paul being a rookie, the game and the situation that it was, didn't necessarily want to thrust him into his NFL debut that way. Regardless, that's something that hopefully we'll have a little bit more clarity later on this week. Like I said, when we do that preview and prediction video as well. From the Seahawks perspective, real quick, Kenneth Walker was a DNP. His coach has talked about being a little bit cautious with that oblique injury, so we'll see how his week progresses. And then DK Metcalf was a DNP with a hand injury. And speaking of DK Metcalf, let's talk a little bit about that Seattle Seahawks offense here. We're actually going to share the screen with you guys so you can see some information as we chat here. But when you look at this Seattle Seahawks offense, quite honestly, the most menacing person that you're going to see, quite honestly, one of the most menacing wide receivers you're going to see in the entire NFL is DK Metcalf. He actually is currently 11th in the NFL. He's got 158 receiving yards, but that's thanks in large part to that performance that he had last week against the New England Patriots. 10 catches on 14 targets, 129 yards, a 56-yard touchdown ball. While he's an absolute monster of an athlete, he can put up those kind of numbers any single week against any single quarterback. He also has been a little bit streaky during his NFL career. And you actually don't have to look too much further back than their week 1 matchup of this year against the Broncos. We talked about those monster numbers against the Patriots. 1 week before, 3 catches on 4 targets, 29 yards. So the key is don't let him get going. Don't let him take over the games the way he has in the past. Do you remember the primetime game against the Cowboys last year? I don't remember if it was a Thursday night game. I feel like it was. 6 catches, 134 yards, 3 touchdowns. The guy was on an absolute heater. He was on another level compared to anyone else that was on the field last night. However, we talked about some of those inconsistencies. He had that game. He had 6 games last year where he caught 3 or less passes. So I'm going to be curious to see, does Anthony Weaver stay true to his word from the offseason where he talked about letting Jalen Ramsey shadow certain teams' tops wide receivers that they're going to go against. I'm really curious to see the DK Metcalf versus Jalen Ramsey matchup. I really would like to see that. On the ground for Seattle, it was Kenneth Walker who eclipsed the 100-yard mark in that week 1 game against the Broncos. However, he did miss that week 2 game against the Patriots with an oblique injury. So at that point, the keys to the backfield were handed over to Zach Charbonnet. He only ran for 38 yards last week. It was 2.7 yards per carry. However, he did catch all 5 of his targets and did notch his 2nd touchdown of the season in that game. So we're going to keep an eye on the injury status throughout the week of Kenneth Walker. However, if he is unable to go, the Seahawks, as we know, do have a young guy with some promise in Zach Charbonnet, capable of getting it done both through the ground and the air. One last thing I want to add about the Seahawks here offensively. They have not, we're well aware of this as our team, but the Seahawks also have not done a great job of protecting their quarterback. Geno Smith has been sacked 5 times over the first 2 weeks. So hopefully that's a trend that we can keep going despite our defensive line and linebackers not necessarily getting all that much pressure on Josh Allen last week. However, I say that knowing that game in regards to what the Bills had to do offensively, Josh Allen only completing like 13 passes. He didn't drop back all that much. We didn't have that many opportunities, but we need a bounce back week with a little bit of added rest here from a Jalen Phillips, from Emmanuel Ogbah. Get some more pressure, take advantage of a weakened offensive line in Seattle. Real quick, we'll take a little drink break. For all you playing at home, remember, like I said, get your questions submitted for the final preview and prediction video in the comments. We always try to get to as many as possible. Defensively, against the pass, you'll see that the Seahawks are actually tied for second in yards allowed through the air at just 128 per game. However, remember, it is early in the season. Keep in mind, their first 2 games against Denver, rookie quarterback Bo Nix, he's not chucking the ball down the field. The New England Patriots, they want to do a ground attack. They don't want to put too much on Jacoby Brissett in the passing game. However, I would say that, yeah, this is pretty obvious. This is still a concern for us, obviously playing with our backup quarterback while also dealing with some injuries to the offensive line that we talked about. An offensive line that even when it's been healthy, hasn't necessarily been all that good, sort of as we expected. So while I'd like to think the likes of Tyreek Hill, Jaylen, Waddle, I mean, they typically have a distinct advantage over any cornerbacks they're facing. In this week, it's Trey Brown, it's Reek Woolen, it's Devin Witherspoon. I think Sunday, and this maybe sounds a little bit too doom and gloom, and maybe I'm prisoner of the moment. I feel like Sunday might be one of those examples of just really showcasing how important Tua is to this offense, and the fact that not just any quarterback can come in and make it happen just because we have Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle. We will see, but that's a little bit of one of my fears. But saying that, one thing that I think could work to our advantage is the idea of getting it going on the ground this week. And we're playing a team whose defense is currently allowing over 140 yards per game on the ground. Last week, the Patriots, like we said, they outright committed to the ground game. They ran 36 times for 185 yards. Now, I do think part of that is, like we said, the Patriots, they want to ground and pound. They don't want to put too much on Jacoby Brissett. However, that's a little bit us right now. I'm not quite sure that Mike McDaniel would want to put too much on the shoulders of Skylar Thompson in his first start of the season. I know it's just not his first start of his NFL career. He's had starts. He's had years in the system. Still don't think that's going to be a key to success in this game, is having Skylar Thompson drop back 45 times in this game. Now, I will also say in regards to our rushing attack, it's looked a little bit different over the first 2 weeks compared to at least how I thought coming into the season. And I thought that a healthy mix of carries would obviously be in store given the running backs that we have. But injuries have taken their toll, and we've proceeded to see De'Von Achane lead the team with 32 carries. Raheem Mostert had 6 carries before he got hurt. Jeff Wilson and Jaylen Wright both have 5 carries. Tua is actually the team's second leading rusher. Would have never said that after I don't care how many weeks, with 28 yards. But like I said, getting that run game going early, finding success in that run game early is going to go a long ways, controlling the clock, making sure that we don't get behind too early in this game, forcing Mike McDaniel to rely too much on the passing game, which we all know he has a little bit of a history of doing if things aren't going as planned with the running game right away. So with how things stand at this point in time, I truly think controlling the game on the ground game, having a solid performance by the defense is the ticket to winning this game without Tua Tagovailoa. And no, I know I'm not breaking any news by saying those obvious things. Regardless, next up, our Miami Dolphins versus Seattle Seahawks prediction video. As I've said a couple of times now, go ahead and get your questions submitted in the comments. As always, we try to get as many included as possible. We will end it there for today, Miami Dolphins fans. But until next time, fins up.